Hello everyone. Welcome to Anupam Tech Talk. This is episode number 18 of my engineering leadership series where we explore practical engineering, artificial intelligence, architecture, system design, and technology leadership. Today, I want to talk about something that is always considered an exciting engineering topic, which is documentation. We write code, we review code, we design systems, we build APIs, but how often do we clearly document the decisions behind what we have built? And here is an interesting question. If you leave your team tomorrow, can another engineer understand your system without having to call you? That's where a good technical documentation becomes extremely valuable. Let's talk about documentation is not just about writing. When people hear the word documentation, they often imagine a long technical documentation with hundreds of pages, maybe. But that's not what I'm talking about. Good engineering documentation does not necessarily mean more documentation. It means useful documentation. A good documentation should help someone answer questions such as why did we build this system this way? How does this component work? What are the important dependencies here? What assumptions are we making? What are the known limitations? And perhaps most importantly, why did we make this decision instead of another option? Let's take a simple example. Imagine your team has built a payment service. Another engineer joins the team 6 months later. They see that the payment service communicates with three different systems. One system handles payment authorization, another handles transactions status, another handles notifications. The engineer can probably understand the code, but they may still have questions. Why are these three systems? Why don't we call them in a different order? Why do we retry one API but not another? Why is there a 5-second timeout? What happens when the payment succeeds but the notification fails? These decisions may not be obvious from the code itself. This is where documentation becomes extremely useful. A simple architecture diagram and short decision document could explain the entire flow. Let's talk about document the why, not just what. One of the most valuable things we can document is the reason behind the technical decision. Let's say your team decided to use a particular database. You could simply write what we use database X, but that's not very useful. A better explanation would be we selected database X because our workload requires high read scalability, strong availability, and particular access pattern. Now, imagine someone comes along 2 years later and asks, why are we still using this database? They have context. They can evaluate whether the original assumptions are still valid. This is one reason architectural decision records can be so valuable. They capture the problem, the options considered, and the decisions, and the reasoning behind the decisions. Documentation reduces dependency on individual. There is another important benefit of documentation is that a good documentation reduces what we sometimes call knowledge silos. Imagine one engineer is the only person who understands a critical service. Whenever somebody has a questions, they have to ask that engineer. What happens when the engineer goes on vacation, or what happens when they move to the another team, or eventually leave the organization? The knowledge should not leave with the person. As engineering leaders, we should try to build a system where knowledge belongs to the team, not to an individual. Documentation is one of the simplest way to achieve that. Let's talk about what should we actually document. So, what should engineers document? I would focus on few important areas. First, architecture. Explain the major components and how they interact to each other. Second, important technical decisions. Explain why a particular approach was selected. Third, APIs and contracts. Make it clear what other systems can expect. Fourth, operational knowledge. What happens when something goes wrong? Where should engineers look into? And fifth, knowledge, limitations, and assumptions. These are often forgotten, but they can be extremely valuable. You do not need to document every line of code. The goal is to document the information that would otherwise require someone to explain it verbally. From a leadership perspective, I think documentation is much more than a technical activity. It's about scaling knowledge. If 10 engineers need to repeatedly ask one person the same questions, we have to acknowledge bottleneck. If the answer is documented clearly, the team becomes more independent. And when teams becomes more independent, engineering organizations can scale more effectively. So documentation is not about creating paperwork, it's about creating leverage. Here is my takeaway for today's topic. Don't ask, do we have enough documentation? Instead, ask, can a new engineer understand the important decisions in our system without needing to find the person who originally built this system? If the answer is yes, you are probably doing something right. Good documentation does not replace good engineers. It helps good engineers scale their knowledge across the organization. Thank you for watching episode number 18 of my engineering leadership series. If you find technical documentation valuable in your team, I would love to hear your perspective. What is one piece of documentation that has saved you significant engineering time? Share it in the comment. Until next time, one lesson every day, better engineering, better leaders.